Welcome back to the channel. This game is the last game in the match between Lev Alburt and Nigel Short, a UK-US challenge match. Nigel was winning the game comfortably, 6-1 up, and this is the last game that was played in the match. Game started as a Queen's Pawn opening and deviated into an uncommon position. The Queen comes out early to hit the D pawn and the B pawn. That reinforces the D5 square, and White forces a trade to Queens. Here Nigel plays E5, maybe Knight to D7 or Bishop E7. Knight F D7 or Bishop E7 would have been better. But he does get the pawn to E4. And Rook to A4. I'm not sure the idea behind this move. I think maybe to play B4 at some point, but it just looks a bit strange. Black continues to develop, and yeah, sure enough, B4. But black can easily defend with knight to C7, and the knight's on a nice square now, defending B5. Going to go to E6 at some point. And white seems to have gone all in on trying to force the issue on the queen side. After A6, I think black has reinforced the queen side sufficiently. I'm not sure how white's going to break through. Bishop E4 hitting the knight, and then Nigel decides to castle queen side. Again, believing the queen side's fairly safely defended. And instead of castling, Albert decides to strike out with the pawn, trying to hit the centre. And now the knight finds the knight's outpost on E6. And also hits the bishop, which has to retreat. And here Nigel decides he's going to start a kingside attack. The king comes to a nice square in the centre. But here Nigel decides to play knight to D7. I think knight to E8 might have been better. And after something like this, where black's trying to force the issue on the king side, I think black has a nice position. And it's going to attack on the king side. But no, D7 is not a bad move. It just seems the wrong square for the knight. Bishop F1 hitting the, again, threatening B5 at some point. I think that's the whole idea of white's play, to try and get the B5 breaking. And Bishop F6 is Nigel's first mistake. This allows a nice sacrifice, which gives white quite a lot of initiative. If bishop takes A6. And after knight to B6, you can see that white's got a nice position, and he's got compensation for the piece. It chooses the wrong square and rook to B6. I think rook to A8 would have been a much better move. And after trading the bishops and knight to A5, it's beginning to look quite good for white. And I think he's got an advantage at this point. Black's got to do something about the rook, and obviously the threat on the knight. Obviously, you can play rook to E8 check, rook D8, E8 check, and then get the king out. But it still looks quite nice for white. But Albert put his rook on B8. Nigel took the open file, but also cleared the D8 square, which was an important feature, which white missed. He played B5, which allowed bishop to d8. I think knight to a5 would have been the right move. And against after the trades, and knight takes c6, and this this is quite an equal position. And even though black's a pawn up, or the exchange up, I should say. No, sorry, he's a piece for the 2 pawns up. It's still quite an equal position, as white can play rook to d6 check and then keep checking with a perpetual if required, if you so required. The Nigel found knight bishop to d8, hitting the rook, and he's got nowhere to go, so he decides to take the knight. But I don't think it's quite enough for white. Knight to c7 just shores up the defence of the d5 pawn. And white pins it. And rook to e6, obviously hitting the c6 pawn. So obviously if knight takes d5, then rook takes c6 can be played. Knight to a5, defending the c6 pawn. And here black just doubles, but I think g5 trying to force the bishop off the diagonal or onto a worse square would have been a better move. And after bishop d6 and g4. And something like this, I think black would have been much better. You can swap off the black bishop, the dangerous black bishop, and he's in a good position. But Albert didn't see that he should play h4, preventing g5, and play b4, continuing the attack on the queen side. And now Nigel did find g5, and it leads to bishop d6, and then now the rook can get active with rook to e3, which is a very good move. Obviously hits the f3 pawn, and just gets black's pieces much more active. And now I think black's clearly winning with the material advantage. Hits the bishop, and I don't think if he plays bishop takes g4, then obviously rook g1 and picks up the g pawn. Or sorry, beg your pardon. If he does play bishop f4, g4, rook g1. No, rook f1 is a better move actually, which something like this, and then knight to d5 will be played. And even though black's still got a good position, then it's unnecessary complications for black when he doesn't need to take the pawn. So he decides to play bishop g6, just dropping the bishop back out of trouble. The d pawn goes anyway. Rook to d3 and king to c1. And there's another move here in play, but Nigel finds the quickest way, which is rook to e2, and the rooks now look very dangerous. It's unclear how white's going to stop the attack. Rook to d1 and rook to f3, which slightly threatens to checkmate the king, which white actually missed. And after rook to c2, it's false mate. Rook to b3 check, king to a1, rook to a3 check, king to b1, and rook to e2 check. And this is false mate. And in this position, Albert resigned the game and resigned the match. So, an emphatic win for Nigel. Two equally rated players, but Nigel ended up winning the games, winning the match 7-1. A statement and a real confidence builder going into 1985. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the games. I'll be back with the next tournament that Nigel played, which I think was the inaugural Commonwealth Championships, which were played early in 1985. Until then, bye for now. Cheers.